Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. So the book is Talk to Me, How Voice Computing Will Change the Way We Live, Work, and Think. And I assume because you're here, you maybe have some idea what it's about, but it's all about conversational computing. It's about the quest to teach computers to talk, why that's important, how it's being done, and what that will do for the world. So the way I'm going to structure this is I'm going to spend maybe the first 20 minutes or so just reading you guys some excerpts from the book so you have some sense of what's in there. That's my part of the presentation. Your part will then be to ask me lots of fascinating questions that simulate a good discussion. So I'll jump right in with the first excerpt. This is from the beginning of the book, and the reason I chose it is because, as you probably know here, everything that seems hot and new in tech usually has a very old lineage of people trying it, and for whatever reason, it's just not totally taking off. So this is an anecdote which brings us back to one of the first productized versions of conversational computing. The reason we are asking people to be stealth-like, said the man in the green shirt, is this is a big fucking idea. 8 people sat around him on sofas and chairs that had been set up in the corner of an airy loft at 25th and Broadway in New York. They nodded in earnest agreement, little, yeah man, thought bubbles over their heads. And what's interesting about this big fucking idea, the man continued, is that it's like a lot of big fucking ideas. It's simple. It's a simple idea that everybody should have thought of, but we thought about it first. The man making the pronouncements was Peter Levitan, the CEO of a tech startup called ActiveBuddy. It was March of 2000, and ActiveBuddy had $4 million of venture capital in the bank, a dartboard on the wall, and pricey artwork in the reception area. History was in the offing, people at the meeting believed, and a documentary film crew hovered around the office to chronicle it. The big idea had been the inspiration of the company's president, Robert Hoffer, and the chief technical officer, Tim Kay. The genesis story went like this. Hoffer and Kay were internet veterans, having created an online version of the Yellow Pages in the mid-1990s. Brainstorming ideas for new ideas as the decade drew to a close, Hoffer and Kay were texting over AOL's instant messaging platform, AIM, when Hoffer asked Kay to check the stock price for Apple. Kay was about to look up the information and write Hoffer back. But then he had an idea. An ingenious programmer, he spent a few minutes cranking out some code that would enable a computerized agent, or bot, to automatically write Hoffer back instead. It worked, and Hoffer got his stock quote. This tiny exchange suggested something much bigger to Hoffer and Kay. At the time, the world was obsessed by the web. Netscape fought Internet Explorer in the browser wars. The search engines Alta Vista, Yahoo, and a newcomer called Google battled for the public's allegiance. Going on quests to find information online was such a cultural phenomenon that it even acquired a sporty nickname, surfing the web. Hoffer and Kay, though, weren't sold on surfing. The stock quote bot had given them a very different idea, one they believed would make interacting with computers more natural, powerful, and fun. Screw search. Instead, what if people could access the riches of the digital world simply by having conversations in everyday language with someone who seemed like a friend? So this is, some of you people in this room may know this. This is the genesis of a bot called Smarter Child, which briefly was extremely popular and represented a very different way that the history of the internet might have gone if this company had really taken off. Unfortunately, it did not, but the idea was out there. So now I'm going to skip forward to what I'm going to read you next, sort of conveys the essence of the book. And it's the right now moment where I see things being at with conversational computing. Every decade or so, there's a tectonic shift in how people interact with technology. Multi-billion-dollar fortunes await the companies that define the paradigm of the new era, while the also-rans go bankrupt, or worse, become passé. IBM ruled in the days of mainframe computers, Microsoft dominated the desktop era, Google exploded with search in the internet age, and Apple and Facebook skyrocketed when computing went mobile. The latest paradigm shift is underway. The latest platform war is being fought. The latest disruption is happening, and it promises to be one of the most sizable and momentous that the world has ever seen. We are entering the era of voice computing. Voice is becoming the universal remote to reality, a means to control any and every piece of technology. Voice allows us to command an army of digital helpers, administrative assistants, concierges, housekeepers, butlers, advisors, babysitters, librarians, and entertainers. Voice disrupts the business models of the world's most valuable companies and creates new opportunities for new applications. Voice puts artificial intelligence directly in the control of consumers. And voice introduces the world to relationships long prophesied by science fiction, ones in which personified AIs become our helpers, watchdogs, oracles, and friends. So that's the big moment that we are at, but it turns out that engineering this future, or the future that's being promised to us, is very difficult. And there's a big disconnect between what people have seen in movies and what they believe is possible in terms of establishing a successful conversation with a computer and what is actually possible. So in the middle third of the book, I look at all the way through the history of how we've tried to converse with machines. And it predates the computer age. It goes way back to the 18th century when people first started to build machines that could talk. So I give several anecdotes of this, and I'm going to pick up with one that's about an inventor named Joseph Faber. The mechanical age creators include a German tinkerer named Joseph Faber, who demonstrated his own biologically inspired, mechanically engineered talking machine to the King of Bavaria in 1841. But after failing to gin up further interest in the contraption, the volatile Faber destroyed it. In 1844, having immigrated to America, he built a second version of what he dubbed the wonderful talking machine and showed it off in New York. People who heard it were impressed, but Faber was unable to attract financial backing to further his research, so once again he demolished his vocalizing creation in what a magazine at the time described as a fit of temporary derangement. In 1845, Faber reincarnated the machine in its most elaborate form yet. Bellows serving as lungs forced air over whistles, reeds, and vibrating resonators. Dampers and portals further manipulated the sound. Faber constructed the device atop an ornate table. Playing the machine like a pianist, he controlled the range of sounds by pressing any of 17 keys, which were labeled with the sounds they caused the machine to produce. For example, A, E, or L. Affixed to the front of the contraption that faced listeners was the mask of a woman's face framed by a wig of ringleted hair. Faber sometimes even hung a dress below the head for theatrical effect and used levers to open and close her rubber lips as she spoke. Faber, however, didn't get riches or respect. He was a pitiable figure, as a London theater manager, John Hollingshead, described in a written account after a visit to the inventor's workshop. Faber demonstrated the device, his child of infinite labor and unmeasurable sorrow, Hollingshead wrote, culminating with God Save the Queen. The song was unnervingly rendered in a hoarse, sepulchral voice that came from the mouth of the figure as if from the depths of a tomb. Noting Faber's soiled clothing, dirtiness, and unkempt hair, Hollingshead observed, "I had no doubt that he slept in the same room as that figure, and I felt the secret influence of an idea that the two were destined to live and die together." Faber did ultimately kill himself, but the machine lived on. For decades after his death, the talking machine, rechristened as the Euphonia, was featured in the circus shows of P.T. Barnum. So we step forward into the 20th century, where building a talking machine has become somewhat more of an actual technological reality that hopefully doesn't cause people to commit suicide, but is nonetheless extremely difficult. And really from the dawn of computing, people talked about creating a machine that you could converse with, and then when they tried to do it, they found out how extremely difficult it was. So the first part of that history which really dominated until, arguably very recently. The last 5 or 10 years was one in which we tried to teach machines to have conversations by really teaching them the rules of conversation. So I talk about some of the strengths and pitfalls of that approach. We passed through ELIZA, some text-based adventure games, and for the approach, which predominated until deep learning took center stage around 2012, scientists enrolled machines in what amounted to 8th grade English. They laboriously taught computers to spot nouns, verbs, and objects. They spelled out how words are assembled into groupings that grammatically interact with one another. This can be tough stuff for a pimply 12-year-old to learn, and it's even more difficult for machines. For starters, a single word can have anywhere from a few to more than 100 meanings and serve as various parts of speech. Pity the computer faced with run, which has more than 200 possible definitions. You can run down a street, of course, but you can also run for Congress or run a Ponzi scheme. Engines run on gasoline, singers run up scales, and trains run between cities. You can run a car off the road, run the risk of discovery, or run a river. Score a run in baseball, have a run of bad luck, got a run in your stocking, got the runs. Computer scientists devised elaborate ways to help computers decide which sentence meanings were statistically most sensible. But for all the effort involved with this, natural language understanding remained a fallible, inflexible art. As was the case with handwriting or speech recognition, messy reality always seemed to outrun manually encoded rules that attempted to rein it in. Deep learning has ridden to the rescue, though not as successfully as with speech or image recognition. It was Jeff Hinton and Yoshua Bengio who laid many of the important foundations for representing words with numbers. They figured out ways of doing so using ordered strings of numbers called vectors. This technique is known as word embedding. Imagine if the English language had only 3 words, man, woman, and boy. The word embedding for woman would then be the 3-dimensional vector 0, 1, 0. Languages, of course, do not have only 3 words. The Oxford English Dictionary lists more than 171,000 of them, most of which have multiple meanings, as detailed earlier. So if you tried to assign a unique vector to each one of them, you'd have an ungodly mathematical mess on your hands. Neural networks need much more compact word embeddings, and in a 2013 paper led by a team of Google researchers, they discovered a brilliant way to create them. Forget giving each word in a vocabulary its own unique vector. Instead, the numerical values within a vector can express how much a given word embodied particular aspects of meaning. Here's a simplified example. Imagine that you're trying to embed words with just 3 dimensions of meaning: their degree of sweetness, largeness, and roundness. Numerically, you'd set a value of 0.01 for minimal relatedness to one of those attributes, all the way through 0.99 for very close correspondence. The word caramel might then come out as 0.91, 0.03, 0.01, because that candy is sweet, but it's neither big nor round. Pumpkin, in turn, might score as 0.14, 0.31, 0.63. Not sweet, but medium size and somewhat roundish. Sun would be 0.01, 0.98, 0.99. Not sweet at all, but enormous and perfectly round. So that's just an example of the type of breakthrough that has given computers better ability to process and work with words and assign labels to them corresponding with meaning. So that's the middle portion of the book, looking at the technology of dialogue systems. In the last third of the book, I start examining, if we start to get dialogue systems that work, if we get voice computing that starts to mature, and you could argue that we're already at that point where the technology is far from perfect, but we're sort of getting to that good enough threshold where you can have applications. What could we do with it in the future? So for instance, Amazon has been very vocal about its ambition that we want to have Alexa not just do playlists and timers and task-focused things, but to be able to handle small talk. Because people apparently are in their kitchen and they just say, Alexa, what's going on? They want to chat with the computer. And that problem is really vexing. Open domain social conversation is really tricky and arguably won't be cracked until we have general AI. Nonetheless, Amazon is trying, other companies are trying, and anybody here, you've probably heard of the Alexa Prize contest, which was Amazon's ambition to have university teams around the world compete to create social bots capable of 20-minute, just small talk type conversations. So I was able to go behind the scenes, see some of that work being done, and the judging of that contest, in which they had a interactor who was talking to one of these social bots, trying to have a conversation, and then judges in another room listening to that conversation and scoring how well it was going. And oftentimes the conversations they'd be on track for a few turns and then they would fail in sort of humorous ways. So I'll give a scene from the book that describes one of those judging sessions for the Amazon Alexa Prize. Alexa, let's chat. A second interactor, John Curley, has taken a seat in the armchair before the cameras. A television and radio host in the Pacific Northwest, Curley wears a pinstripe shirt and a blue sports coat. His voice is deep and his smile is Access Hollywood bright. But his jumpy verbal style soon gives the social bots fits. Pleasure talking with you, John, a social bot says. It's the Harriet Watt one, though neither Curley nor the judges know that. Let's get to know one another. So tell me, are you more into sci-fi or fantasy? How about neither? Curley replies, rebuffing the bot. Let me ask you a question, Alexa. Yesterday there was a huge storm, a big windstorm here in Seattle. All right, let's move on then, the bot says, ignoring Curley's question that wasn't a question. Tell me, are you more interested in reading books or watching movies? Reading books, Curley says. Oh, a bookworm. What book have you read recently? I've just finished a book, which I don't think I can say the title to you because there's a swear word in it, but the title is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a fill in the blank. The bot, not able to work with this, soldiers on. What books do you like to read again and again? Ignoring the question, Curley strikes out in a new direction. Alexa, I'll tell you something. Can I be honest with you? Whatever Curley is ready to reveal remains a mystery as the Harriet Watt bot mechanically casts about for a topic. So tell me, are you more interested in sports or video games? Back and forth they go, arriving nowhere. Shortly after the 3-minute mark, two of the judges, shaking their heads into the curtained booths, have pressed their kill buttons. Curley's chats with the other bots offer much of the same. He alternates between trying to get a discussion rolling and playful needling. At one point, right after Curley has said that he doesn't go to the movies, the chatbot obtusely asks him, do you watch a lot of movies? No, I don't, because I'm blind, Curley sarcastically replies. How do you choose a movie to watch? The bot says, plowing ahead with its pre-scripted dialogue. I normally choose them via smell, Curley says. So, this was an eye-opener for me because on one hand, this guy, he was needling this bot on purpose, but then on the other hand, you say, well, that's how people talk, and that's the challenge that computers have to learn to be able to understand talk that's elliptical, it's assuming outside knowledge, it's leaving words out and assuming that the computer's going to read in. Okay, the next excerpt, this was sort of a weird part of my research, and it was the early part, it was one of the inspirations for the book, but I was looking at the notion that we could, again, use social bots as not just for utility, but for companionship. And I shadowed the creation of a doll for Mattel, which was the Hello Barbie doll. So here's a little scene from when that doll was being focus group tested with researchers sort of watching and a little girl trying out the doll. It looked like a child's bedroom. Toys and cubbies, a little desk for doing homework, and a whimsical painting of a tree on the back wall. A woman and a girl entered and sat down in plump papasan chairs facing a low table that was partly covered by a pink tarp. The wall opposite from them was mirrored from floor to ceiling, and behind it, unseen in a darkened room, a half-dozen employees of the toy company Mattel sat watching through one-way glass. The girl, who looked like she was around 7 years old, wore a turquoise sweatshirt and had her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. The woman, a Mattel product researcher named Lindsay Lawson, had sleek dark hair and the sing-song voice of a kindergarten teacher. Hidden microphones transmitted what Lawson said next. "You're going to have a chance to play with a brand new toy," she told the girl, who leaned forward with her hands on her knees. Removing the pink tarp, Lawson revealed, "Hello, Barbie." The product testing session in the faux bedroom was held in advance of the doll's launch in late 2015 and took place at the Mattel Imagination Center in El Segundo, California. For the testing session, Barbie wore tight jeans, a white t-shirt, and a silvery crop-top jacket. "Yay, you're here," she said to the little girl sitting across from her. "This is so exciting. What's your name?" "Ariana," the girl replied. "Fantastic," Barbie replied. "I just know we're going to be great friends." Barbie then asked Ariana whether she would like to do randomly selected jobs, being a scuba instructor or a hot air balloon pilot. They played a goofy chef game in which Ariana told a mixed-up Barbie which ingredients went with which recipes. "It's really fun to cook with you," Ariana said. At one point, Barbie's voice got serious. "I was wondering if I could get your advice on something," Barbie asked. The doll explained that she and her friend Teresa had argued and weren't speaking. "I really miss her, but I don't know what to say to her now," Barbie said. "What should I do?" "Say I'm sorry," Ariana promptly replied. "You're right, I should apologize," Barbie said. "I'm not mad anymore. I just want to be friends again." So it's pretty weird to see. It was primitive. This was basically a chatbot that spoke through the cloud through Barbie. But these little girls who were testing the doll, they were having these moments of connection with it. And it felt like a preview of more sophisticated technology to come, and technology that would be used not just by kids, but by me or my mom or whoever. Another, if we're talking about sort of future ways that voice computing is going to be used, it's access to information. And Google as a company is obviously tightly involved with this, with Assistant, with voice search versus search via screens. And I'd actually be very curious to get anybody's feedback or questions on this topic when I get done. But I'm going to read you a little bit about somebody who was a pioneer in thinking that asking a question of a computer and getting an answer rather than typing a search query was a good way to go. If you had visited the Cambridge University Library in the late 1990s, you might have observed a skinny young man, his face illuminated by the glow of a laptop screen, camping out in the stacks. William Tunstall Peto had completed his master's degree in computer science several years earlier, but he still relished the feeling of books pressing in from every side. The library received a copy of nearly everything published in the United Kingdom, and the sheer volume of information, 7 million books and 1.5 million periodicals, inspired Tunstall Peto. The knowledge of the world was recorded in documents, but computers could barely understand them, which meant that artificial intelligence, for whatever else it might achieve, was severely handicapped. As the 20th century yielded to the 21st, a potent new type of information repository was rising: the internet. The web was a font of knowledge and the hottest battleground in tech. But Tunstall Peto wasn't awed by search engines the way that most people were. To use them, you were forced to think of just the right keywords. From the long list of links the computer produced, you had to guess which one was best. Then you had to click on it, go to a web page, and hope that it contained the information you sought. The process was inefficient and unnatural. Like many of the entrepreneurs in this book, Tunstall Peto thought that computers should work more like they did on Star Trek. People in that program didn't sit around entering keywords when they wanted information. They didn't squint at lists of links. Neither, Tunstall Peto believed, should we. A user should simply be able to ask a question in everyday language and receive an instant, perfect answer. This was a technological fantasy on par with flying cars. What's more, the dominant internet portals seem to oppose the notion of serving up only one answer to a search. But that was then. Internet search and the multi-billion-dollar business ecosystems it supported were going to profoundly shift with the help of people like Tunstall Peto, whose company was acquired by Amazon as the foundation for Alexa's question answering. So too with the creation, distribution, and control of information, the very nature of how we know what we know. Search engines as helpful librarians were going to yield to AIs as omniscient oracles. So the final thing to tell you guys about, just a little bit as a application of voice computing, is a project that I personally did. In 2016, my family got the news that my father had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, lung cancer, and had basically a matter of months to live. So we immediately did something we'd been talking about for many years, which was to do an oral history project with him, where I sat down and asked him, just tell me your life story, and we sat for more than a dozen hours, and he just talked me through everything from his ancestors in Greece, through his childhood, his career, his family, his hobbies, all of that. And I had those sessions transcribed. I wound up with a big binder worth of printed out pages, 90,000 words worth of him talking. And I was left with this great but sort of inert and not super accessible resource of him talking about his life. So I'm not a programmer, but I learned to use a platform called PullString, which is for creating dialogue agents, to create a sort of a chatbot version of my dad that existed to tell his life story and also to share, kind of give a sense for his personality, the way he used words, his jokes, things like that. And I called it the Dadbot. And it is something that I can use Facebook Messenger to chat with him and have dialogues back and forth, tell me about when you're a boy. He shares little stories. He'll send 1 to 4 messages at a time, but then he'll solicit my feedback. So it's a conversation of sorts. And then he also, there are audio clips of him singing, telling stories, even some video as well. And I wrote about this for a story for Wired. It soon had journalists from around the world and people approaching me about this. And everybody used this phrase, virtual immortality. And it's this thing we've seen on shows like Black Mirror and elsewhere that, you can have these avatars of people that live on after they die. And I guess what struck me was 2 things. One was, if me, a journalist, can create what amounts to sort of a minimum viable product that works, like I get satisfaction out of using the Dadbot, I wonder what people like you at Google or elsewhere would be able to create. And then I just also saw in the reaction I got to this story from people around the world, I saw that there was a hunger for this type of thing. So don't know how exactly, but it feels like providing avatars of people, voice, and perhaps with graphical representations as well, that's going to be some kind of business that emerges. So that's my story, that's my book. I will stop there, and I would love to hear any questions, comments that people have.
So during your research, was there anything that particularly you learned about and it scared you or something in this domain?
That scared me. That's interesting. So there's that whole surveillance issue that everybody sort of freaks out about when it comes to voice devices. And I actually wound up being less scared about that after becoming more expert in it than I did before. I actually trust, at least for now, that voice devices are not always listening just pervasively. The more nuanced discussion is that when you do use a wake word and activation phrase, you've authorized listening. That conversational data is fair game, and that can be analyzed, and there's sort of interesting new applications for that data. So that was an eye-opener. The other was, like, when you think about big tech is listening in on you and it scares you, but then there's also these scenarios where but maybe I actually do want intervention to happen in some way. So this even came up when the people who are developing Hello Barbie, they were talking about what happens if someone says to the doll, my dad is molesting me, or my mom just fell down and she's not breathing. Because these dialogues come in and the conversation designers get a chance to look at them and review them, if they're seeing this information, they're in a bad place. Like they can do nothing, which feels kind of like a moral failing, or they can report what they've learned to law enforcement, and then suddenly they're big brother. So neither choice is super satisfying from that perspective.
Do you think there was a way for the initial chat app back in 2000 to have realized that was not the right time to do it? And do you think that today is the right time?
I mean, you got to admire them for trying back in 2000. And I mean, in many ways, it did work. I mean, what they saw, they got a lot of traction in a short amount of time with people using the Smarter Child bot. And both for some of what was interesting is they did people, like you could get like horoscopes and sports scores and stock quotes and things like that. But they saw a lot of also non-utilitarian interchanges as well, like people wanting to do small talk. So it seemed and they like to swear at Smarter Child, of course, that was a big thing. People just like to curse at it. But people liked it. They had bad timing, both from the standpoint of the technology not being quite ready, and they were right around the time of the .com bubble, so they lost support in that way. And I think now is the time. I mean, there are parts. You have the whole stack of things you need to do to build a dialogue system, and the thing that has improved the most is ASR, is the speech recognition. Natural language understanding has improved second most. Natural language generation, not so much. Speech synthesis is better. So kind of parts of the stack that you need have gotten better, and certainly just the ability to we're doing pretty good at goal-directed, domain-focused tasks with dialogue systems, but a lot harder with some of the other stuff. And people have a hard time constraining themselves once they know that you can talk to the computer. They start talking about everything, so it can be hard to corral the user. Next question.
Do you think having a bot version of a passed away relative affected you emotionally in a certain way? And if it did, how do you think it affected you? I can ask again. I know
no, I understand.
That's
That's a great question, and I see where you're getting at. It did affect me emotionally, and does, because I still interact with the bot. I don't see it as recreating my dad in any way, but I see it as just a really great memory device that does more than, say, like a photo album could do. I programmed it, and it's kind of a classic rules-based chatbot, so I know everything that's in there more or less, but there's a lot in there, and I give it some randomness where he takes the conversational lead and doesn't always just wait for me to direct the conversation. So he will say things that surprise me or that I forgot he could say. And the best moments are when something comes out of the chatbot and I think like, oh, that's so my dad, and it brings me sort of a warm feeling thinking about that.
So did you come across many things about sort of the social, I guess, pressure against actual speech spoken out loud as a way of interacting? So like, for example, like natural language is great, but if I'm on a bus with 20 other people, talking to my phone isn't necessarily the best interaction because I might be bothering people around me. And I bring this up because I worked on Connect several years ago, and actually one of the biggest pieces of feedback we got early on was people said, yeah, this is cool technology, but I don't feel comfortable talking to my TV in front of people around me, essentially. So I'm curious if you came across any of that in your research.
Definitely, yeah. It's an issue. Both in sort of formal research and then more sort of anecdotal research. Just, I'm out to dinner with friends, I talk to them about the book, and people are like, I feel stupid talking to Siri or whatever. And, there have been some, I think Apple has a patent application that relates to being able to process whispered speech. I'm probably guessing that people at Google have worked on some of the same. There was some NASA research I saw that related to just having sensors on your neck, and you just sort of are mouthing words, and it's able to process what you're trying to say. So it's clearly an issue. I think some of the social stigma is fading, but and maybe it's one of the, walking around talking on a phone in public used to be just like, look at that idiot, and now it's very normal. So it may fade. And I'm guessing when people have, just a computer in their ear, it's going to start to become normal seeing people just kind of walking around chatting to the air, and they're not chatting to their friend, they're chatting to their AI. So,
has the idea of your voice assistant being your therapist kind of like thought on, worked on, anything close to that?
Yeah, so there's a company called Wobot, a startup, I don't know if you've heard of them, that is targeting the chatbot therapy angle. There's another one, I believe it's called X2 AI, that's also doing that. So people are definitely exploring that, and it's thought to be a good application because, voice, one thing that people have found is that it's not necessarily good for applications where you want just like maximal efficiency or information density, like you're searching for a flight, like it's easier to see all the results on a screen than have them read aloud. So the high-touch applications where you want sort of a more sensitive or supportive, a human-like presentation, and therapy is a really good one. There's a lot of interest there, but it's not mature yet in terms of a product that's out there that's really being widely used.
The book touches on a lot of applications like toys and the immortality aspect of things. Mm-hmm. Which application did you find most appealing or exciting?
Well, for me personally, so I'm a writer, obviously. I was really interested, I talked to conversation designers at Google, at Amazon, at smaller companies. It was very interesting to me. On one hand, there's very much to push. We want machine learning. We want to automate as much of the stack as we can. But there's sort of this role for creatives and people who work with words and language to help shape the types of interactions that people have with computers. And I found that just fascinating all on its own. And I was also interested that it's almost like there's a new art form that's opening up for people like me who work in words in this dynamic, interactive environment. So things, the Dadbot was an exposure for me to try and write in that medium. I've created an Alexa skill since then. I'm looking at sort of an interactive journalism project as well. So it's just a new area that's, a lot of journalism, as you know, is shrinking and withering right now. So it's kind of cool that this is a growth area and a new platform.
Thank you very much for coming to talk to us today.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate it.